Hey everybody, I'm Tom Barnas. This is the 78 podcast, a podcast for stories from the 78. And if you don't know what that is, I appreciate you checking it out. It's a website about things happening in and around Chicago. Or, you know, when I just decided to take a trip, like a couple weeks ago, I went up to Milwaukee to see the Browns Fonz. But I've done other things in Germany and Israel and California and New York and Maine. So be sure to check out other past podcasts and also the website itself. I did something really cool last summer when I went to Portland, Maine and got to tour. Bangor, Maine, where I got to tour where Stephen King lived and where he got inspiration for It and Carrie, Pet Sematary, the whole thing. So I digress. I don't know why I just picked that randomly, but this week I went out to a place called Common Decency. Now, this used to be the old Lost Lake in Chicago. And a lot of people might not remember or do remember Lost Lake. It was like an old tiki bar, and it was around forever. And it finally, was closed down and finally reopened into Common Decency. And it's a cool spot where it has a lot of like 80s vibe going on. And in the back room, a quote from the bartender / manager who was working there: "It's the room where things get sexy." So I loved that place. It was really cool. It had checkered floor, the red chairs and booths, and very retro Miami Vice vibe in a very cool way. The food matched the drinks perfectly. Kind of top-notch place. It's like more of a cocktail bar with great food added to it. So yeah, super cool. A lot of fun. And then it was because it was Memorial Day week. Sorry, I'm getting all these alerts because I thought I turned the thing off, but I'm into this recording. I'm going for it with all the distractions going on right now. So Memorial Day weekend, and I struggle sometimes what to post on the website, right? Because I'm trying to be timely and also sensitive to what's going on in the world. But every time I think about Memorial Day, 4th of July, Veterans Day, I think about my family, specifically my grandpa, my dad, and my Uncle Bob, who all served in the armed forces. And fortunately, all of them came back from their duty overseas or for the military in general. My grandpa served in World War II. And when I say my grandpa served in World War II, I say that with the thought of my grandma also serving her part for World War II, because, just because she didn't go and fight doesn't mean that she didn't put up a good fight here at home. And she certainly did. And that's why I wanted to put something up about Memorial Day. Now, like I said, my grandpa did not die during World War II, but he was a veteran and he did pass early because of things that happened to him because of World War II, medical things that happened to him after World War II. And I just think it's a great way to honor his memory. So that's what I did. I posted a story about the origins of Memorial Day. Like, we all celebrate Memorial Day. And, I hope people celebrate because of our freedom, not because you got the day off, And I know that a lot of people say that lately, and there's all this and that, and people are divided. And like, at the end of the day, right? Our country is what it is. War is not, clean. It's dirty. Has the United States been clean and free of things? No. Every country is guilty of something. Every country has had bad stuff happen to it. Even the native people from that particular country also have had war within the country. So like, war is terrible everywhere. But I think Memorial Day is a good spot to reflect on what we have as a country and thank the people who were forced to fight because they were drafted or chose to fight because they wanted to defend our freedom. Either way, I think it's an honorable thing to, honor people on Memorial Day, Veterans Day. Or, when you just see somebody, then they served, and, just tell them thanks, man. We fly a flag outside of our house for the people that I know that have fought, and some have died and some have not. So I'm not trying to make this preachy by any means, but I thought it was my duty to at least post the origins of Memorial Day and why we celebrate it here in the States, because I think it's important. And I'm not saying that we've been right about anything. I'm just saying that we did have people here who fought for freedom. And there's a lot of people here in the U.S. that still believe in freedom and how lucky we are to have it. So there you go. I'm transitioning slightly, kind of, but I was in Omaha, Nebraska for a friend of mine, his son's graduation for high school, right? So go to Omaha. I have never been to Omaha. I've driven through it like as a kid, but I've never been to it to hang out for a couple days. So we got to do that, drive around all over Omaha, and it's a cool Midwestern town. They have a huge park that goes right up on the river there that I believe is the Missouri River. It's not the Mississippi because that's the other side. But anyhow, this particular river, there's a little spot that jets out. It's really pretty. If you ever have a chance to get out to Omaha, I would suggest going check it out. The College World Series is a big deal out there. But the reason why I'm telling you all this, there's two things. One of the stories is going to come out later, and it's about this candy place there. And I could do a whole podcast just on the candy place. It's phenomenal. However, there's another thing there that, so as we're driving, my wife and I were in the car with the kids driving to Omaha, and we start reading all like these fun facts about Omaha because you're driving in the middle of Iowa. There's not a whole lot going on. So, you start reading about things that you're going to go visit. That's what we do all the time. So she was reading all these things about Omaha, and then she mentioned something about balloon bombs. And I've never heard of balloon bombs. If you've heard of balloon bombs, please let me know. And if you know there's another one around, I would love to know like where one of these things has happened. You can shoot me an email, tombarnaschicago@gmail.com. And a balloon bomb not only was found in Omaha, Nebraska, but it exploded in Omaha, Nebraska. And these balloon bombs were sent over from Japan at the end of World War II as kind of like a last ditch effort to like rock the American public. Like they wanted to cause chaos. They wanted to cause a panic that, bombs were being sent from Japan and actually getting to the United States. And the State Department and our government, they kind of knew what they were doing, because they're balloons. And this, you know what I mean? They take a while to get here. And they sent out notes to like news stations and newspapers and local government agencies telling them not to say anything because they knew that it would cause panic. And one of them did end up exploding over a town called Dundee in Omaha. I'm sorry, a neighborhood called Dundee in Omaha, Nebraska. And there is a plaque right there on the street. And that's the site that, or the page that I have, or I should say the story that I have on the page on the website of storiesfromthe78.com. It's just called, Did You Know the Balloon Bombs Were Used on America During World War II? It's fascinating. There's a plaque there, and you can read all about it, or you can go to the page itself. It's just a quick video of the site, but it blew up. Nobody was really hurt, so that's like the great news about it. But the fact that it happened and it actually exploded was kind of the big deal. Because, we think the first time that something really crazy happened in the United States was at Pearl Harbor or 9/11. But right there in the middle of the country, a balloon bomb exploded right over Omaha, Nebraska. So you got that as a story. I interviewed a gentleman and a woman, I should say, Monica Ing and my friend Howard. I'm going to make sure I get the name right because I don't want to screw it up. I'm looking at the story now. David Hammond, I think I said David, but David Hammond and Monica Ing, former newspaper writers here in Chicago. They wrote a book about it's called Made in Chicago, and it's behind the scenes stories of 30 great hometown bites. And it talks about all the wonderful things that we have that are like kind of local here in Chicago, like the Italian beef sandwich started here in Chicago. Burritos started here in Chicago. I can't even say the next thing, but it's a Japanese dish started here in Chicago. So there's 30 stories of that. And that's only 30 because they only wanted to cover 15 each because it's a lot. But there's more. But the book is fascinating about all the cool things that Chicago has to offer that started in Chicago. In particular, the Italian beef sandwich. Now, in Chicago, we think it's like normal, like most towns think, a hot dog is normal. In Chicago, it's very unique, though, because it started here in Chicago, and it started out of necessity during the Great Depression, which I think is just a fantastic, origin story, if you will, happening when they called it a peanut wedding, meaning like it was cheap, right? And it, right there on Taylor Street in Chicago, you have all these places. And it started off funny, at least with Al's Beef. And that's featured in this book. And then that's where I was at to shoot the story. They would have a front up in front of like these stores or these houses. and they would sell these Italian beef, and they sold it because it was super cheap to make. They took the beef, they sliced it really thin, they dumped it into a vat of au jus, which is basically gravy, or the trimmings of like when you make Thanksgiving dinner and you got all the juice at the bottom. That's au jus for beef, right? So they dump it in there so it gets heavy, and you can put some green peppers on there, and that's kind of the way you do it. It's been modified over the years where people will put red sauce in there, otherwise known as like tomato sauce, and you can put jardiniere, of course, and you also can put mozzarella cheese, but some people say that's desecrating it. And then there's the crazy thing where it's the combo, where it's the Italian beef and sausage in one sandwich. I personally love it. My friends there, though, they did not love it because they thought it ruined the flavor of the beef. David did not like it. He's a purist, which I completely understand and completely appreciate. But it got so popular, though, during the Depression that people started coming more and more to get the beef. And so the bookie joints that were selling the beef as the front, realized, hey, we can go like on the straight and narrow and just sell beef sandwiches and make a ton of money doing this. And that's what they did. And then other people copied it. And then it became like a huge thing in Chicago, kind of like deep dish pizza. Because deep dish, if depending on who you believe, there's a place called Nancy's Pizza, which was like the OG pizza joint in the city that made deep dish pizza. And then you had the guys that worked there went off and did their things. Like Giordano started because the guys that worked at Nancy's started their own thing and kind of borrowed the recipe and so on and so forth, where you have all these deep dish things. And the irony of all of it is that most people from Chicago really don't love deep dish. They love the tavern style pizza that Home Run Inn made so famous when they cut it into squares and they gave it out for free at the local bar that was Home Run Inn to make people drink more beer. So there you go. Plenty of stories like that in Made in Chicago, the stories behind the 30 best hometown bites. So I would suggest checking that out, and you can buy the book, and it's made to be a book that you can put like in your glove compartment. So when you drive around the city, you will be able to just pull it out and check it out. And I know you can look it on your phone. It's not the same though when you have a book in your hand and you can make notes and the whole thing. So yeah, it's a nice, easy, quick read, and it gets you around the city to check out like foods that are excellent and very unique to Chicago. Another thing that we did this week, and I did something for CBS as well, but since I was there, and I love this place, the Brood. It's called the Brood. It's a horror themed coffee shop in Avondale. I love it. It is a fantastic place. And if you go into the story, I basically shot a video of the place, the highlights of it, so it shows like the sandworm from Ghostbusters, wrong movie, from Beetlejuice coming through the ceiling. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there. It's like as if I created a coffee shop instead of doing the whole TV and radio thing. This is the coffee shop I would create. The Brood is named after a movie that a director did that is huge in the horror space. And I don't want to say the name of the director wrong right now, because as I'm talking about this, David Kornberg, that's his name, David Kornberg, he made The Brood. It's a horror movie, and that's where they took the play on words, and then you got Brood, the coffee shop. It's right there on Avondale on Milwaukee Avenue. And the best part about this, it's got all this old school vintage stuff in there that you can take a look at. A lot of the stuff in the coffee shop's not for sale in terms of like their memorabilia, but connected to it in a little or like a straight up door, you have Bric-a-Brac Records, which you can buy mostly everything in that place. It's all 80s and 90s nostalgia. The albums are amazing. I found a Halloween 3 album when I was there, bought that. And the coffee's great too. I shouldn't say anything about the negative about the coffee. The coffee's fantastic. They have pastries that come in from a local bakery. It's a fun place. So I would highly suggest checking out the Brood. And it was perfect to check out like on a rainy, crappy day that was yesterday here in Chicago. Now today it's Jekyll and Hyde. It's now 73 and sunny. Another thing to check out in general, specifically this weekend though, was Pullman Rail Days in the neighborhood of Pullman. Now, folks who don't know Pullman, I'll give you a quick history lesson. Pullman, far south side of the city. I'm talking like 115th, way down there, right? It's next to Roseland. And the Pullman neighborhood was Chicago's first planned neighborhood. A lot of times people have said that the Pullman neighborhood was the first to offer running water and heat and all the things that we take for granted now. This was built for that because George Pullman, who owned the Pullman rail cars, wanted his workers to be close. He didn't want them to have to drive far. And he also wanted to kind of control things, right? So you control things by offering people things they think they need or want. And in this case, they did: housing, running water, electricity, warmth, because this gets cold. And he brought a lot of workers from overseas to Chicago. So that's why Pullman, if you drive through it, it's beautiful. Has it an old neighborhood? Yes. Has it seen some downturn? Yes. But it's on the upswing. It's a national park now, and the old Pullman factory is there, and that is the national park. So you get to see that, and they're restoring it slowly but surely over time. So this past weekend, they have free, events that you can do at the national park, and paid walking tours where you can see the Hotel Florence and a bunch of other spots along the way. Pullman is fascinating because the metro tracks roll through there, and that is not by accident. That is by design, because when Pullman picked that spot, he wanted people who were arriving in his Pullman neighborhood to see the factory, because it was the home of like these beautiful rail cars that were shipped all over the world. I mean, I think the best thing to compare like what these rail cars were like luxury suites, for travel. Like you go to a baseball game and you get the most bougiest luxury suite you can get at a baseball game or a football game. Like picture that on wheels going across country, because that's the way people traveled back then. This is well before airplanes and stuff like that, or like a steamship, like the bougie and Titanic, those folks where they have the really bougie spot inside the Titanic. This is that, but on rails, and they made it right here in Chicago. It's also home to the labor movement, the first African-American labor movement with the porters, and all the labor movement kind of happened here. And, like Pullman was big for a long time. And of course, when the airplane came around, it's kind of the end of it. Although it's still there and it's worth checking out. It's amazing. And Pullman itself is a neighborhood that's on the upswing, as I said earlier. So much so that I did a story maybe a year or so ago at a place called the Pullman Tech Workshop. And what they do is specialize in helping people in the Pullman community who buy these houses. You can't just renovate the houses in Pullman. You have to renovate it to a specific look and feel, because it's a historical landmark, because it's a national park. So this particular organization uses the tools and the architectural renderings and the way they did it in the 1800s, from railings to the outside of the building. When you restore it, you have to restore it to look like that. You have to, otherwise they'll tear it down and make you start over. So the Pullman Tech Workshop helps the people of Pullman build their porches, because their porches have this ornate craftsmanship in the rails and all these things. It's beautiful. So if you've never been down there, just look up the Pullman National Park, make a day of it, go down there. The food's great. There's a great barbecue place down there that's one of the best in the country. And it's really close. You just get off the expressway, you're right there. And then you got Roseland, which is a great community as well. You got Beverly down that way with the record store, the whole thing. So those are kind of the things that I did this week over at storiesfromthe78.com. It was a fun week, and the thing I did for CBS that I have to quickly mention, and if you have the second, go to cbschicago.com, is Cindy Fee. I did a story with her like a couple weeks ago. She's the woman of the Golden Girls, and she had a one-woman show in Chicago, and I talked to her prior to the show, but we did a whole morning with her at the Cabaret, Venus Cabaret at the Mercury Theater in Chicago. That was awesome to hear her stories. I mean, she worked with Dolly Parton, Whitney Houston. She did a duet thing with Kenny Rogers in one of his biggest Christmas albums of all time. She's fantastic. She has a great story. She lived in Chicago for a long time in like the Oak Park neighborhood. And that is why she was the person that did the dedication for Betty White Day when she passed, her like celebration of life. Great story. So be sure to check that out, or go to storiesfromthe78.com and look at the little story. I did an interview with her. It was like 10 minutes long. And we talked about all things Golden Girls, all the way to the voice of Pontiac, Get Up and Ride. She has that soulful voice. Fantastic woman. And those are the stories that I love telling. And it wasn't for this website and this podcast that I wouldn't have been able to get it for CBS, because I found Cindy just doing what I do on my own. I didn't get pitched. It wasn't anything like that. It was just by showing up, which I tell my kids all the time. Half the battle is showing up. So Thank you for showing up for this podcast. I appreciate it. Try to keep them quick and dirty, and here I am coming in under 20 minutes. So thank you very much. Tom Barnas, chicago@gmail.com. If you have an email you want to throw my way, head over to the website, Stories from the 78. And then until then, I will talk to you next week. Thanks.